Stop. Just stop for a moment. If you are thinking about stopping amlodipine because of the swelling, because of the dizziness, because you read something frightening online, because you simply feel like the medication isn't working, or you've decided you don't want to take it anymore, I need you to watch this video before you do anything else. Not because stopping is always wrong, but because what happens inside your body during 5 years on amlodipine and what happens when you stop it without understanding the full picture are two stories that most seniors have never been told, and the gap between those two stories is where serious preventable harm lives. I'm Dr. Eleanor Bennett. Subscribe to this channel before we go further, because this is the conversation that belongs at the beginning of every amlodipine prescription and at every anniversary of it. It almost never happens. Today it does. Let me start with the behind-the-scenes story, because most people on amlodipine know what is happening on the surface. The blood pressure number improves, the doctor is satisfied, the refill is automatic. What almost nobody knows is what has been happening underneath that number. Inside the vessel walls, inside the heart, inside the microscopic structures of the organs that depend on stable, consistent pressure to survive. Let me start with Robert, because Robert's story is the one I tell when I want someone to understand what 5 years on amlodipine looks like from the inside. Not the label, not the monitor, not the pharmacy receipt, the inside. Robert was 66 when he started amlodipine. His blood pressure had been creeping upward for 2 years, and his doctor chose amlodipine, a calcium channel blocker, specifically because of its smooth, steady, 24-hour pressure control and its proven track record in reducing cardiovascular events. Robert was told it might cause some ankle swelling. He was told to watch for dizziness. He was told to come back in 6 weeks, and he did, and the numbers were better, and life continued. Year 1 was unremarkable. Year 2, the ankle swelling arrived in earnest, not dramatic, but consistent by evening. Robert accepted it, learned to live with it, told nobody. Year 3, he noticed his morning showers sometimes made him feel slightly washed out, a vague unsteadiness that passed before he had finished drying off. He attributed it to the hot water. Year 4, he stopped playing golf on hot days because his legs felt too heavy by the back 9. He attributed it to age. Year 5, his blood pressure was excellent. His doctor was satisfied, and Robert was quietly living a smaller life than the one he had 5 years earlier, without anyone having connected those reductions to the medication that was, on paper, doing its job perfectly. That is the behind-the-scenes story of 5 years on amlodipine. Not a crisis. A slow, quiet erosion of function and freedom that happens so gradually it becomes invisible. Mistaken for aging, absorbed into routine, filed away as the price of getting older. It does not have to be that way. But understanding why it happens requires understanding what amlodipine is actually doing inside the body, year by year, layer by layer. Let me tell you specifically what happens to the heart, because the heart's story on long-term amlodipine is one that generates no symptoms, appears on no home monitor, and reveals itself only when someone looks carefully at the right things with the right tools. The heart is a pressure-sensitive organ. It responds to the environment it pumps into. In high blood pressure, the left ventricle, the main pumping chamber, must work against elevated resistance every single beat, every single day. Over years, it thickens in response to that demand. This thickening, called left ventricular hypertrophy, is one of the most consequential long-term complications of uncontrolled hypertension. It stiffens the heart, it reduces its flexibility, it makes dangerous rhythms more likely, and impairs the heart's ability to fill and empty efficiently. Amlodipine, by lowering the pressure the heart pumps against, can reduce that thickening over time. That is one of the reasons it is used, not just to lower a number, but to protect the heart from the accumulated toll of years of excessive work. In this sense, amlodipine is doing something profound behind the scenes that the blood pressure monitor never shows directly. It is, in the right patient at the right dose, quietly preserving heart structure while the number on the monitor gets the credit. But here is what that also means. The heart that has been protected by 5 years of amlodipine, the heart that has been working against lower resistance, remodeling in a healthier direction, recalibrating its output to a pharmacologically managed environment, is not the same heart that would survive an abrupt removal of that protection without consequence. The rebound matters not just for blood pressure, it matters for the heart that has spent years adapting to a different mechanical reality. Vivian was 68 and had been on amlodipine for 5 years. Her cardiologist had noted at her year 3 echocardiogram a reduction in the mild left ventricular thickening that had been present when she started. The medication was working behind the scenes in exactly the way it was designed to. Vivian did not know this because nobody had explained it clearly enough for her to hold on to. She knew her blood pressure was good. She did not know her heart was actively being protected in a way that depended on the continuity of the medication. When she casually mentioned at a routine visit that she had been thinking about stopping because she was feeling well and had seen an advertisement for a supplement, her cardiologist pulled up the echocardiogram comparison and showed her what 5 years of amlodipine had done. That image was more persuasive than any number on a monitor had ever been. Understanding what the medication is doing is often the most powerful reason to continue it, or the most informed foundation for deciding to stop it properly. Here is what amlodipine does on day 1 that nobody argues with. It blocks calcium channels in the smooth muscle cells of artery walls. Calcium is what tells those muscle cells to contract, to tighten. Block the calcium signal, and the muscles relax. Relaxed muscle means wider vessels. Wider vessels mean lower resistance. Lower resistance means lower pressure. Clean, logical, effective. But here is what 5 years of that mechanism does that almost nobody explains. The artery walls, exposed to this constant state of pharmacological relaxation, adapt. The smooth muscle in those walls remodels over time in response to the chronically altered pressure environment. The arteries become accustomed to a different set point. They learn at a cellular level to operate in conditions of lower resistance. And the body's own regulatory systems, the hormonal systems, the nervous system signals, the reflex arcs that manage blood pressure second by second, recalibrate around the presence of the medication. This recalibration is not a problem while the medication continues. It is the problem when the medication stops suddenly. But before we get to stopping, let me finish the behind-the-scenes story, because what 5 years of amlodipine does to blood vessel structure is something almost no patient ever hears about, and it is genuinely important whether you continue the medication or eventually move away from it. Chronically elevated blood pressure damages the inner lining of blood vessels, the endothelium, through a process of repeated mechanical stress, small tears, inflammatory responses, the beginning of plaque accumulation in response to that inflammation. Over decades, this is how high blood pressure contributes to atherosclerosis, to coronary artery disease, to stroke risk. The vessel walls that were designed to be smooth and responsive become thickened, stiffened, and narrowed. Amlodipine, by reducing the pressure those walls are exposed to day after day, can slow this process. It cannot reverse damage that has already occurred, but it can meaningfully change the rate at which new damage accumulates. In a body over 60, where that process has likely been underway for years before the medication was ever started, that slowing matters. It is the kind of protection that does not show up on a monitor, but shows up in the probability of avoiding a serious cardiovascular event over the next decade. Stanley was 75 and had been on amlodipine for 7 years. His cardiologist described his vessel health as better than expected for his age and history, a quiet, clinical way of saying that the medication had likely been doing work that his genetics and prior health history would not have supported on their own. Stanley had never thought of his blood pressure pill as something that was protecting the walls of his arteries while he slept, while he gardened, while he sat reading in the evening. He thought of it as something that kept a number within a range. When his cardiologist explained the fuller picture, Stanley said something that has stayed with me. He said, "So it's not just about the pressure. It's about what the pressure has been doing to me all these years and whether this medication has been slowing that down. Yes, exactly that. And that is the behind-the-scenes story nobody tells at the pharmacy counter. Because the body that has spent 5 years adapting to amlodipine's presence is not the same body that started it. Remove the medication abruptly, and the artery walls, no longer receiving the calcium-blocking signal, tighten. The vessels constrict, pressure rises, and in an older cardiovascular system that has spent 5 years adapting to pharmacologically lowered resistance, that rebound can be swift, significant, and dangerous. This is called rebound hypertension, and it is one of the most underestimated risks in senior blood pressure care. Let me tell you about Caroline. Caroline was 74 and had been on amlodipine for 6 years when she decided, after reading an article about natural blood pressure management, that she wanted to try stopping her medication. She felt well. Her pressure had been good for years. She reasoned that perhaps her lifestyle changes, the dietary improvements, the walking, the reduced sodium, had done enough work that the medication was no longer necessary. She did not call her doctor. She simply stopped. She had no idea this was dangerous. The article she had read focused entirely on natural alternatives and said nothing about what happens to a cardiovascular system that has spent 6 years adapting to a calcium channel blocker when that blocker is suddenly removed. Within 4 days, Caroline had a headache behind her eyes that she had not felt in years. Within 6 days, she felt a pressure in her chest when climbing stairs that was unfamiliar and frightening. On the 8th day, her daughter found her sitting on the kitchen floor, pale, saying she felt strange. Her blood pressure, measured at the emergency room, was critically elevated, significantly higher than it had been before she ever started the medication. That is rebound hypertension. That is what happens behind the scenes when 6 years of physiological adaptation meets abrupt removal of the medication that has been managing it. The body, accustomed to pharmacological help, overshoots in the wrong direction when that help disappears. Now let me be honest about something important. Not every person who stops amlodipine will have Caroline's experience. The severity of rebound depends on the dose, the duration of treatment, the individual's underlying cardiovascular physiology, and whether any compensatory measures are in place. But every person who stops amlodipine after years of use without medical guidance is taking a risk that is completely unnecessary, because the right way to stop, if stopping is the right decision, is not abrupt. It is gradual, supervised, monitored, and accompanied by a realistic conversation about what comes next. So what is the right way to have this conversation? The first question is not, how do I stop? The first question is, why do I want to stop? And I ask that not to challenge the desire is often completely valid, but because the answer shapes everything else. If you want to stop because of ankle swelling, that is a solvable problem in most cases without stopping the medication entirely. Dose adjustment, elevation strategies, a different medication class, or a combination approach may resolve the swelling while preserving the blood pressure benefit. Stopping amlodipine because of swelling, without exploring those options, may be exchanging one problem for a larger one. If you want to stop because you feel dizzy or unsteady, that is clinical data that deserves evaluation, not dismissal, and not unilateral stopping. Dizziness on amlodipine may mean the dose is too high for your current body. It may mean you are more sensitive to positional pressure changes than you were when the dose was set. It may mean the medication is working too well in combination with something else you are taking. All of those are conversations, not reasons to simply stop. If you want to stop because you read something frightening, bring what you read to your doctor. Not all of what circulates online about blood pressure medications is accurate, and even the accurate parts rarely account for your specific cardiovascular history, your specific risk factors, and the specific reasons this particular medication was chosen for you. If you want to stop because you feel that the medication is no longer necessary, because your blood pressure has been so well controlled for so long that you wonder if you still need it, that is a legitimate and important question, one worth asking. But the answer requires a proper evaluation, a supervised tapering process if stopping is appropriate, and a clear monitoring plan for what comes next. Not a private decision made on a Tuesday morning when you feel good. Let me tell you about Dennis. Dennis was 71, had been on amlodipine for 4 years, and came to me specifically to have the stopping conversation. Not because he had done anything impulsive, because he had noticed that he felt dizzy after his morning shower, and he had heard something from a friend about natural approaches, and he wanted to understand his options before making any decision. He had printed out questions. He had kept a symptom diary for 3 weeks. He was, in every sense, a patient doing exactly what a patient should do. That conversation covered his cardiac history, his current dose, his symptom pattern, and his goals. By the end of it, Dennis did not stop amlodipine. His dose was reduced slightly, his timing was adjusted, and his morning dizziness resolved within 2 weeks. He did not need to stop. He needed to recalibrate. And that single conversation turned out to be the thing that saved him from an unnecessary risk on one side and an unnecessary discomfort on the other. That is what the stopping conversation should look like. Not a quiet decision made alone, not a panicked response to a frightening article, a real, informed conversation that takes the full picture into account. Now let me address the silent destruction part of this video's title, because that phrase is not designed to frighten you. It is designed to be precise. The destruction that happens silently during years of unmanaged or poorly managed amlodipine use is not the destruction of a dramatic event. It is the destruction of options, of range, of the daily freedoms that make life feel like life rather than management. It is the morning walk that gets shorter because the legs are too heavy, the social event avoided because standing for an hour is uncomfortable, the hobby abandoned because the swelling makes it impractical, the conversation never had with the doctor because the symptoms seem too small to mention. The dose that was set 5 years ago on a body that no longer exists being applied to a body that has aged 5 years in between. That is the silent destruction. Not a stroke, not a heart attack. The quiet narrowing of a life. One avoided walk, one unmentioned symptom, one missed conversation at a time. And the antidote to it is not stopping the medication. The antidote is making the medication work for the life you actually want to live, not the life the prescription was designed to manage in a 15-minute appointment 5 years ago. So here is what I want you to take away from this video. If you are thinking about stopping amlodipine, please do not stop without a supervised tapering plan and medical monitoring. The rebound risk is real, it is underestimated, and it is entirely preventable with proper guidance. If you are experiencing side effects that are reducing your quality of life, swelling, dizziness, fatigue, the sense that your world has gotten smaller since you started this medication, those experiences are not things to accept silently. They are things to report, to name, to demand a solution for. Because in most cases, a solution exists that does not require choosing between your blood pressure and your life. And if you have been on amlodipine for 5 years and nobody has had a deliberate, unhurried conversation with you about how the medication is performing in your current body, not the body of 5 years ago, the body of right now, that conversation is overdue. Ask for it by name, a medication review, a side effect evaluation, a conversation about whether the current dose and timing still match the person taking it. Robert eventually had that conversation. Year 6 was different from year 5, not because his medication changed dramatically. It didn't. Because someone finally asked the right questions, listened to the real answers, and helped him recalibrate his treatment to fit the life he actually wanted to live. The golf returned. The morning walks returned. The swelling, with a dose adjustment and a targeted approach, became manageable rather than defining. The medication had not failed him. The conversation around the medication had failed him. And the moment that changed, so did everything else. Share this video with someone who is thinking about stopping their blood pressure medication on their own. And subscribe to this channel, because protecting yourself after 60 means staying informed, speaking up, and never letting a number on a monitor be the only story your medical care tells. I will see you in the next video.